Hi, this is Lisa, and you are listening to I Love That Movie. This podcast is for movie lovers. It's not an unbiased opinion, it's not a straightforward review, it's just a couple people talking about a movie that they love. The format is each week I have a guest, and that guest and I discuss a movie that they love, something they're obsessed with, something they connect with. We'll talk about the plot, the director, and the actors, but we'll also talk about the personal connection my guest has with that movie. So if that sounds like something you want to listen to, keep listening. Hey, this is Lisa, and if you want to follow me on Twitter, you can at ILTM Podcast. We're also on Instagram at I Love That Movie Podcast. We're on Facebook, and you can also support us on Patreon. That's www.patreon.com/I Love That Movie. This show is always free, but if you want to throw a couple dollars our way to support the show and keep it running, you can. And I do want to take a quick moment to thank my top patrons, and they are Chris Balga, Jeff Widman, Michael Cross, and Philip Barker. Thank you guys so much for keeping the lights on. I really appreciate you. And when you do sign up, you get an extra bonus episode of my weekly ramblings about all the new shows that are coming out. For instance, right now I'm talking Umbrella Academy, just wrapped up Stargirl. In fact, I'm going to have to add extra stuff to my slate because all my favorite shows have ended. But don't worry, there will be more content on there. And you only donate about $1 or more, and you get that bonus episode. We've also got a Discord group, a Facebook group, and I've recently started doing an after party. So if you do like this episode, you can also join me on Friday live, the Friday following this episode's release, and we will talk about this movie again. And we basically all just hang out and chat and discuss, how we feel about the episode, anything I might have missed, favorite scenes, things like that. So if you really enjoyed this episode and you want to keep talking about Dazed and Confused, please see that link in our show notes. And I think I'm done plugging. We've got a website too. If you guys ever need to check out our website, I love that movie podcast.com. And as always, guys, if you like what you heard today, please subscribe and rate us. It does help new listeners find the show. Well, I've got a returning guest on the show. He is active in our Facebook group. He's been on the show, and he's one of my friends. Say hi, John.
Hello, everyone. John Rodgers here.
And John, why don't you introduce yourself a little bit in case this is our guest's first time hearing you on the show?
Okay, well, I'm here because I love that movie. Uh, yeah, that is the most apt title you could ever pick for a podcast of this kind. For those of you who follow us on Facebook, I'm the guy who posts all the Turner Classic Movie alerts and things that happen on there. I'm a big lover of older movies, but I like contemporary stuff as well. I'm a retired school teacher and uh, sometime community theater person whenever that's going on, which we're kind of not right now. And I was honored and had a wonderful time being on the I Love That Movie episode where we discussed To Kill a Mockingbird a few years ago. And I'm really glad to be back with you tonight.
Well, John, yeah, you have fans in the group for sure. I know Scott's always like, I love the Turner Classic Movie updates. So you're very much appreciated in there. And you're always adding new people to the group too. So I appreciate that as well. And I've seen your plays. Well, I've seen one of them, one that you directed last year. And hopefully that'll get up and running again. They're usually in Denton, right?
Yeah, I live in North Denton County. I'm a regular, if you will, at what is now called Theater Denton. Denton Community Theater and Music Theater of Denton merged a couple of months ago, and it's now known as Theater Denton. And I've also done some things at Lakeside Community Theater in the Colony, and last last fall I was in August Osage County at the Theater of North Texas and South Lake. but unfortunately, that theater ceased operation not too long after that. But
Oh, no.
yeah, but it was a. If I can brag a little bit, it was profitable for some of us in the cast and crew on that. Myself and Jenny Tucker won the Column Awards for Best Actor and Best Actress in an equity play uh, last month, I think it was. And our director and uh, producer, I think they won Best Play and Best Set Design. So we brought home a little bit of hardware. Uh, and I've done used to be a regular down at Duncanville Community Theater before we moved up here, and it's my other hobby.
Well, that's great. Thank you so much. And I know we've in the past we've even volunteered together in costume
Yes,
because you have a great Superman costume too.
not lately. I've got some pandemic pounds. It'll be a while before I can play Superman again.
I think we've all got that problem right now, so you're in good company. Um, so John, our guest always chooses the movie, and you chose the movie last time. You chose a different kind of movie this time. What movie did you choose today?
I chose Dazed and Confused, directed by Richard Linklater, and it's just well, there we go with the title again. I love that movie.
You have
It
been talking about this for a while too. This has been in the works between the two of us. You're like, Lisa, when are we doing that episode? And I realized that the other day. I was like, oh my gosh, we need to do it right now. You can't wait anymore.
Yes, this movie is just a lot of fun, very nostalgic for me because the it's set in the mid 70s. In fact, it's set on the last day of school in 1976. I graduated from high school in 75. I've shared with you the story before that in 73 when American Graffiti came out, my buddies and I'll watched that and loved it. But I said, I'm going to wait 20 years. I'm going to become a filmmaker and I'm going to remake American Graffiti, but have it be about us. And Linklater beat me to it. I never became a filmmaker anyway. My directing career went another path. So, uh, uh, but yeah, it when I first saw this movie, I'm like, whoa, this is exactly what I had in mind when I said that so many years ago.
Yeah, I think that just speaks to the strength of your idea, right? I mean, I think that a lot of people saw American Graffiti and they had that same thought, like, hey, we could do this with, different eras, with the 70s. I would love to see one set in the 80s and 90s. I think there's something about American Graffiti and this film. I think it was kind of called the inverse of a John Hughes movie. I think that was
Yeah,
Linklater's intent, and it is very much that. It feels like what high school was actually like versus
it was.
what.
It was exactly like this movie.
Right, and in a way that's like there's no real like drama in this movie. There's no seriousness. I think we've fallen into like two camps with teen movies, right? Where like either they're incredibly serious and dramatic and kind of depressing, or they're, John Hughes extremely happy, a little more Hollywood, a little bit higher production. This is like a much smaller story, a much um I don't want to say personal because I guess it's not really that personal, but it's just like a slice of life. This is what it is. There's not really an end game here. You're just looking at what it's like the last day of school. And there's just something super charming and relatable about that no matter when you see it, it's got like just a pool of its own that I kind of wish we had more teen films like this, if I'm honest.
Yeah, a lot of people point to Fast Times at Ridgemont High as being this movie for the '80s, but I disagree. This movie, as you said, slice of life. This movie is everything in it happens during one 24-hour period, where Fast Times covers pretty much the whole school year. Um, like Fast Times, there's a lot of vignettes. There's very little linear. Well, it is linear, but very little plot. Is
Right.
and it's very episodic. You're following different groups of kids around and seeing how they interact and uh, the things that they're into, and it's not just one person. You know, while it is a coming of age story, it's not a one person coming to some cosmic realization about the meaning of life. It's just kids in 1976 getting ready to go buy Aerosmith tickets.
Something I was thinking about last night when Nick and I were watching it, and he actually brought it up that, there's something about just like riding around in a car with your friends. That's like a huge part of high school. Like, not necessarily what they go to do, but just that a lot of being in the car, it's late at night. It's like that thing of you don't have a lot of money, you don't have a lot of places to be, you can't publicly party anywhere. So there's just a lot of in between in the car time. Do you agree?
Oh yeah, and also this was before the big oil crisis. It was a big part of our lives. Gas was when I first started. When I got my first car, gas was only 49 cents a gallon. Of course, minimum wage was only like a dollar and a half or something. Um, but it didn't take a whole lot to fill up your car with gas and just go riding around and uh, uh, video games weren't a thing yet. That was still a little down the road. So yeah, we would hang out and ride around in the cars, play the radio on our favorite stations, playing all that wonderful music. I hope we're going to talk about the soundtrack of this thing because it's amazing. Um, and just be. And that was a big feature of American Graffiti too. The cruising. In my case, where I grew up, we had a Jack in a Box, and across the street from the Jack in a Box was a 2 lane parking lot behind a, sort of a strip of shops, and we would just ride around and around that parking lot until you saw somebody you maybe wanted to talk to, and you'd pull in and park and you talk, maybe pass something between each other or whatever, and and the law enforcement in our town kind of liked that because they knew where we all were, and we had pretty. I think they were pretty cool uh, law enforcement in our little town. I won't say exactly what town it is, but uh, they knew we were there, and they knew what was going on, and they, unless something uh, major happened, which rarely, if ever, did, then they pretty much left us alone because we weren't causing any trouble and we weren't hurting anybody. And uh, again, we're just, and there wasn't much else to do. There was, the Jack in the Box, there was a drive in movie theater and parks, and that was about all.
So it occurs to me there's one thing you're not saying that I think is different for like me in high school, and I think maybe why the culture shifted. You're not talking about a mall. And I think that things moved from cruising around in the car to going to the mall. And maybe that's why movies after that were a little bit different.
You know,
When all that time got replaced with, my parents just dropping me off at a mall and being like, "I'll see you later." And we'd all kind of hang out there, but we didn't drive around quite as much. I still remember driving around though, again because you just didn't have a lot of money. So I'd be at the mall for a while, but I didn't really have any money to spend. I'd go to the arcade for a
right.
little bit, and after a while, I was like, "All right, I've there's nothing else to do here," and
Yeah,
that's
well,
something that you lose as an oh, go
in the
ahead.
middle '70s, the malls were just starting to spring up, and
Yeah.
they were brand new. In fact, I had a paper out a year or two before that, and I remember it had the paper was very fat this one Sunday because they had the rotogravure insert for the new mall that opened up in our town,
Mm.
and so yeah, that was all about that. Malls were a new thing; they had not taken over the teen culture yet.
That's interesting. Yeah, that's why later, like in a lot of '80s movies, the mall's like at the center stage of those movies because that's where kids went. And it's something that I kind of miss about being young. Like Nick and I were talking about that yesterday. There's not a whole lot of driving around anymore, you know? I mean, there's definitely not now because of what's happening,
Right.
but, you know, we don't often just get in the car and drive, and when I was younger, we did that a lot. So, I mean, it's just there's just a lot of little things like that that, you know, things that you don't think you're gonna miss when you get older, but you really do. I
Right. Yeah.
kinda got a little bit ahead of the game here, and I
Okay.
just couldn't help it because we were reminiscing, and I was caught up in the moment, but I should also read the description of the movie. So this
Yes,
came out in, oh, go ahead.
by all means, let's follow your usual format.
I never do. I'm all over the place. But, this came out in 1993, and as always, guys, there's not really any spoilers to this movie because, again, it's really just a night of hanging out. I highly recommend that you go watch this first, because if there is something you're worried about being spoiled, we're definitely gonna talk about it. But, let me go ahead and read the description really quick. This coming of age film follows the mayhem of a group of rowdy teenagers in Austin, Texas, celebrating the last day of high school in 1976. The graduating class heads a popular pool hall and joins an impromptu keg party. However, star football player Randall Pink Floyd has promised to focus on the championship game and is abstain from partying. Meanwhile, the incoming freshmen try to avoid being hazed by the seniors, most notably the sadistic bully Fred O'Banion. And that's it. There's not a ton of plot, and that is okay. That I can't wait to dive into like all the different things that are in this movie and things that have changed. Absolutely love that it's based in Austin, Texas, and I have to think that's because the writer director grew up in Houston, right?
Right. Richard Linklater is a Texan, and and if you know me, you know that occasionally I do a Texas author poetry reading thing. Ever since the pandemic started, uh, I have a special place. Well, on the Mockingbird podcast, I pointed out that the screenwriter for that was Horton Foote, a Texas writer. But yes, Linklater is from Texas, and I think that's one of the reasons why it spoke to me because suburban Austin looks a lot like suburban Dallas Fort Worth did back then. We had a pool hall that we hung out where we hung out. Uh, uh, a plot point. Um, it's set in '76. There was a statue of the fife player and the drummer from the famous painting Spirit of '76 in the film that the kids steal, and one of the kids paints their faces to look like Kiss.
Yeah.
And that is very similar to a prank that was pulled quite often in my town where the big boy from in front of Kip's Big Boy restaurant would get stolen for a senior prank and placed on top of the high school. The cars in this film are dead on. In fact, there's a discussion between two of the characters about what all's under the hood. That was a big thing among some of the kids in my generation was how powerful they can make their cars and that sort of thing. The soundtrack. I'm sure you got in your notes that 1/6 of this film's budget was spent on gathering the music that they wanted, that Linklater wanted to be playing. Just as in American Graffiti had all that great music from the late '50s and early '60s, this one definitely is classic rock through and through. In fact, it's always been a contention of mine. You can take the two soundtrack discs from CDs from this movie, the Forrest Gump soundtrack and the Knight's Tale soundtrack, and you could pretty well program a classic rock radio station with just those 4 or 5 CDs there.
Yeah, yeah, I did have written down that, that it was 1/6 of the budget, and that's not surprising. There's a lot of great music in there, and also, when you were talking earlier about Austin being similar to Texas, I think, you know, there's a perception about what Texas is like, and that's I think, a more modern take of where we're at now, but I think the Austin and the Dallas of the '70s was very different from what we have today. I think it was a lot more, you know, liberal to put
Yeah,
it lightly. I mean, you know, more hippie culture, more you know, this is where, you know, KERA started. This is where
Right.
NPR started. I mean, I think people kind of forget that Dallas used to be so different. Like the landscape was different, the culture was different, and so I think people today might see this movie and they realize it's in Austin, and they would be like, "That's weird." My perception of Texas is just very conservative, a little more traditional,
Right.
maybe more Western. But
Yeah,
Austin
there's
and
not a single
Dallas,
pair of cowboy boots inside in this thing.
right, it's like, I think that that speaks to, and I'm not trying to pigeonhole or leave anybody out politically or anything like that when I say that, but I'm just saying literally, it is different from, I think, what is perceived, and because what we perceive is what's Dallas today is more like. You do see more cowboy hats these days, and you do see
Oh,
more
sure.
of this kind of like, not debutante, but you know what I mean, like upper class, like schmoozy culture in Dallas. So I think things have just changed so much from what they used to be in the 70s that
Mhm.
I think younger people today might watch Dazed and Confused, and they probably pop it in assuming it's going to be about LA, and then realize, oh, this is in Texas. That's really unique. And like you said, there's no cowboy boots, not really any accents. Um,
Right, that's
yeah,
something I always point out, except for Matthew McConaughey and the gentleman who
right.
played the coach, uh, you couldn't tell where these kids were from.
Hmm.
And then my role as an educator, I obviously have a Texas accent that sometimes I have to hide when I play a role. My father had a very distinct Texas accent, and you couldn't even have understood my grandfather. Where my son, I dare say that people, if you heard him talk right now, you wouldn't be able to tell for sure where he comes. So with each generation, the stereotypical Texas accent gets less and less. And I do have to commend Linklater for not trying to shoehorn stereotypical Texas things in this, even though this is filmed in the same city and one or two of the same locations as Urban Cowboy of all things.
Wow, I did not know that.
Yeah, Urban Cowboy was filmed in and around Austin, and I think you see Top Notch Burgers uh, in Urban Cowboy. I know you see it in one other movie. I may have be confused as to which other one it is, but yeah, your Urban Cowboy is more like the Texas that you were describing that most people are used to.
Yeah, Yeah, I've noticed that when, I don't know, just talking to people, they're like, "Oh, you're from Dallas? I wouldn't have thought that." And I think it's just, they think of like the show Dallas and an urban
Right.
cowboy, and yeah, this is definitely a little bit different from that. But I mean, I think, Linklater was telling his truth. I mean, he's not going to portray something that he didn't experience. So he's portraying Austin as he experienced it. And I think, kind of like you're saying, I think maybe it's a little more varied here than you would think it is on the outside. I think what you're talking about accents, it's like I don't really have a. I mean, I do slip into a Texas accent, but it's not as pronounced as some. But then other people in my life, some do, some don't. It's just kind of, yeah. That's just how Dallas is. But yeah, we actually wove in all my quick facts already, so that perfectly, they organically came up in the conversation. So I think the next thing I want to do is maybe just tackle some of your favorite scenes, and then we'll kind of talk about the actors in them that way too.
Okay. Favorite scenes. It's kind of hard to have a almost favorite movie and have any one favorite scene. Let me start with a favorite character, and
Sure.
that's Anthony Rapp's character Tony.
I was shocked that was him. I was like, "Oh my gosh, that's Anthony Rapp." I couldn't believe it.
Well, let's talk for a minute. There were so many careers that began in this movie,
Mhm.
but some of which went on to wonderful things like uh, Matthew McConaughey. We mentioned him earlier. Um, Mila Jovovich was in it. I probably just mangled her name. Anthony Rapp. Um, Cole Hauser, he's currently on Yellowstone.
Oh, that's a really popular show.
Yes, it is. Parker Posey.
Yeah.
And Renee Zellweger had a bit part in it just 3 years before she did the Tom Cruise movie.
Oh, yeah, that's true.
Yeah,
I thought I saw her, and then I was like, "Was that her?"
yeah,
Um
it was her. She's known as Girl in Blue Truck, and most of the later scenes, like around the Emporium, the pool hall, she's the girl in the red and blue striped top. But I don't think she has any lines. So yeah, there's actors like that who went on to careers that we all know about, but then there's actors that should have that kind of didn't, like Jason London, who you mentioned as in the synopsis as being the star quarterback guy. Uh, he has star quality written all about him in this movie, but his career never really took off. I mean, he's worked steadily, but he never became a major star. Who was Anthony Rapp's friend Mike in this? I know I've seen him in things like Saving Private Ryan, and he was on Friends.
He was also the Hebrew Hammer.
Yes, I forgot about that.
That's how we recognized him because we kept like, Nick and I just kept looking at him, and then Nick all of a sudden was like, "Do you know who that is?" And I'm like, "Who?" And he's like, "The Hebrew Hammer." And I was like, "Well, obviously it is." Like, when but he's just so young.
Sure, sure. Wiley Wiggins, who played Mitch, who was sort of the main kid of the younger kids, who was uh, the baseball pitcher that I mentioned to you earlier. I think we weren't on yet when we talked about this. Yeah, let me just say the first time I saw this movie, I didn't see it in the theater. Uh,
Oh, okay.
I was it came out during what I call my dark period because it was before I became a teacher. I was a retail manager and I was working deep nights for a supermarket chain. And I would flip on the TV in the early afternoon to uh, at what was my bedtime. And I was flipping the channels and I came across this movie. And as you know, I love baseball movies. And that was the scene where Mitch is pitching in the game. I said, "Oh, okay, we got a movie here about kids playing baseball. Maybe it's like The Sandlot or something." I had no idea what it was, and so I stayed with it. And I went, "Whoa, this is my high school story here." And so that's why I stayed with it that first time, and I've seen it innumerable times since. Okay, back to Anthony Rapp's character Tony. Uh, when we first meet him, Pink calls him John Boy, and he seems to be sort of a scholarly type, and uh, they called me John Boy when I was in high school because that's when the Waltons was on. John Boy Walton was an aspiring writer, and so there's that connection. And he just seems to be a little bit more intellectual, not super popular, but not an outcast either. That's pretty much describes me in those days. So I really identify with that character.
Well, I'm so glad you explained that because I wasn't sure what the John Boy reference is. I think that was a little before my time, so I like that explanation. But I was thinking about this movie last night. I'm like, I wonder who John's gonna say reminds him of himself the most. So I think that's really cool. I agree with you. I think for me, I kind of identify. Oh, I forgot to say too. I had not seen this movie before.
Okay.
So this was like my first time and I really enjoyed it. um I'm not sure the actor's name, but the really young guy that has kind of like the shoulder length hair, kind of lanky, the one that gets like hazed the most.
Okay, that's Wiley Wiggins. Mitch. He's Jody, the girl that Pink winds up making out with at the beer party. That character is her little brother. When the boys are getting ready to go out and start hazing, we'll talk about that in a minute. She says, "Take it easy on my little brother." You mean Mitch Kramer? Yeah, yeah. Take it easy. He's kind of little, you know. He was the kid in the baseball scene. He was the pitcher, and that's what drew me into the movie. So I think we're talking about the same kid.
Yeah.
Touched his face a lot. Did you notice that mannerism he had?
He reminded me a lot of Joseph Gordon-Levitt in Third Rock from the Sun. Like, I have to think that when they made that show, they were like, "There's this one character in Dazed and Confused, and I want you to mimic this guy." Like, he even looks like him, same haircut, everything. It's really
I
interesting, but
I can see that.
yeah,
Wiley
like
Wiggins, another actor who did a fine job in this, but really didn't get into acting as a profession. He wound up working uh, as a designer or something for Apple computers, I believe. I can look that up.
oh,
But
wow.
yeah, uh, so uh, again, it's funny how life. Well, of course, again, a lot of these kids were kids when they made the movie. A lot of the actors were a little bit older playing kids, especially the upperclassmen.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, you can tell, like, characters like Ben Affleck's character and some of the older senior girls. But yeah, I just thought it was funny. Like when I was watching this movie, I was kind of thinking, who do I identify with? And I don't really identify with any of the girl characters. I didn't quite fit into any of those categories. And I told Nick, I said, I think I'm the kid with that giant Adidas sweatshirt on. I don't know what was going on in the early '90s, but when I was in middle school, I wore a lot of baggy Adidas t-shirts, a lot of baggy jeans. So I was like, I think I looked more like this kid than any of the girls. And I was definitely small, I'm 5'1". So I was always getting picked on for looking younger. So he was the character I gravitated towards the
Right.
most. Yeah.
And you touched on something there, the fashions, the clothes were right. Again, all the details to this are just so dead on. The girls were wearing big bell bottoms, and I think there's a scene where you see a girl wearing jeans so tight they had to use a pair of pliers to zip them up for her.
Yeah, I loved that scene. That is too real for sure. Like we all remember like trying to fit into clothes that we didn't, but it's fashion. You had to do it. And also same thing like when I was in middle school for some reason the '70s were just coming back really big. I had there was like a lot of the flowers. I had bell-bottom jeans and I remember my dad being like, "Why are you dressing like this?" My mother was the one that always bought my clothes. So she was
Right.
aware of what I was buying, but I'd come home and my dad's like, "How come you're wearing bell-bottom jeans and you're wearing this and wearing—" He's like, "That's what I wore in high school." And I was
Hmm.
like, "Oh, whatever, dad." But and then right after that, that's when we get into like the grunge era. But it's kind of interesting to see that on film because I think it's almost like the later '90s really drew upon the style of the '70s way more than the '80s. It's almost like they were like,
Right.
"Goodbye '80s, we are rejecting you. We're going to go back to the '70s. That was more real." And also the fact that just like you're saying, it's more of a realistic version of what the fashion was like and not like, Saturday Night Fever or something.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. Back then, my buddies now we wore blue jeans and uh, various different kinds of shirts, and which you see all of them in there. Sometimes it was just a pocket T-shirt. Sometimes it was a shirt with big puffy sleeves, like Pink wears in the later part of the movie. Uh, big collars, all of that. And again, not a single pair of cowboy boots do you see in this movie, and very few of us wore uh, cowboy gear. You mentioned Ben Affleck. This is one of Ben Affleck's first roles, and when I saw it, I didn't even recognize him. I knew him from Good Will Hunting and the later things. He's very identified with Boston, so it's kind of strange to see him in this movie set in Texas. Although, like you said, there's nothing that really says it's Texas per se, except that it could be suburban city anywhere. But
Yeah.
uh, interesting to see Ben Affleck with this curly hair hanging down in his face and being the most sadistic of the hazers. Let me talk about hazing for just a minute.
Yeah.
It seems it seems to be very cruel, and it was there, and that's why it's included. Since then, there people have gotten better sense and passed some laws. Occasionally, you will hear a news thing where some hazing incident goes terribly wrong. And for those who haven't seen the movie, the hazing here is that the upperclassmen would grab the incoming freshmen and paddle them with wooden paddles. uh, Paddling was a thing that was used for corporal punishment all through my school life, and I had to have a discussion with the Board of Education like twice in my whole school career. Uh, so yeah, the paddles that you see the boys making and using in this are very much like the ones that the assistant principals and coaches used to maintain discipline. Uh, but in my school, the hazing and my school was high school was while I was there was just 10th, 11th, and 12th. The freshmen were still down at junior high, so it was the incoming sophomores that bore the brunt of the hazing, and it would mainly focus on football boys, the incoming athletes, and when football practice would get started in late summer, the upperclassmen would grab a sophomore player and cut his hair so that the only way to fix it was to go get it buzzed all the way off. It was called clipping. Uh, so that was the suburban Dallas Fort Worth version of hazing that was going on in my experience.
Well, yeah, I was gonna bring that up because, I was wondering, so hazing, in modern day, we associate that with college and not with high school, um, and by the time I went to high school, there was no hazing, at least at my high school, so that was kind of interesting to see. Now when you see hazing, it tends to be at the college level, and it
Mhm.
tends to be associated just with, like, sororities or fraternities, so it seems like it really evolved from affecting everybody to only certain specific groups. I thought that was interesting.
Right, and I don't recall. Maybe one of my friends, if they hear this, can address this, but I don't recall there being girl hazing uh, at my school, and maybe it happened elsewhere, and it is depicted here where the freshman girls are humiliated, and you got to love the way Jody, Michelle Burke's character Jody, takes the little girl Sabrina under her wing, just as Randy Pink Floyd takes Jody's little brother Mitch kind of under his wing. Yeah, they make them go through the hazing, but they go easy on them. And then Pink tells Mitch, "Say, hey, we're going to be riding around later. You want to come go with us?" And Mitch is like, "What? You two guys just busted my butt with this paddle." And he says, "No, no, it'll show you're cool if you kind of laugh it off, and it'll be a good way to uh, establish himself among the group." And so he does, and uh, Mitch has a good time the rest of the night hanging out with his new friends. Some of the ones that's just busted his butt with a paddle earlier in the film.
Yeah, I would say outside of this, there's always a little bit of tension between, like, the seniors and the freshmen, like, that's kind of a common thing that I think still happens today, and, who wouldn't want the cool older kid to take an interest in you
Mhm.
and, like you said, incorporate you into the group and give you a heads up, and I think we all kind of wish we could go back in time and help our younger selves, and so that kind of fulfills a fantasy on
Right.
both ends, right?
Yeah, it does. When I was a senior, my little brother was a freshman, and that was the year that they did bring freshmen up to our high school. So he would ride with me to school, and we would have a blast in the morning, singing along with the radio and whatever. And then we get to school, and I'd be like, "Dude, I don't want to see you. I don't want to hear you. If you pass me in the hallway, do not acknowledge me." Uh, and then when we'd ride home in the evening, we'd crank up the radio and have a good time again. So yeah, there is a division between the upperclassmen and the lowerclassmen. But here is summer vacation and in this film, and so those lines blur, uh, especially once some of the underclassmen like Sabrina and like Mitch uh, show that you know they belong.
Yeah. I also noticed too that, there's a similar tension, like, the high school seniors are so mean to the younger guys, and, but then there's that same tension and that same, like, kinda dominance and, like, kind of putting down a little bit with their coach, and you know what I mean? Like, with their authority figures, with the people that are older than them, and it's funny seeing that, like, the way that they act around those kids and then the way they have to turn around and act around the adults, and I kinda liked
Right.
that both those scenes are in there.
But there's some really cool adult characters too, like the guy, the convenience store man. Uh, he knows that that kid is underage, and he sells them the beer anyway. He never says it, but you get the idea that he's got to know that. Mitch's mom at the end, she said, "Okay, son, this is your one get out of free card," and the little grin on her face as she closes his bedroom door, like, "Okay, here we go." Uh, uh,
Yeah, I think that's another more realistic part about these movies. I feel like a lot of times, I don't wanna be too, like, judgmental or tell people how to raise their kids or anything like that. And I'm not saying like, "Hey, I 100% approve underage drinking," but what I'm saying
right,
is it feels like in a lot of movies there's a pressure to make sure that the kids are punished at the end. They go to a party and something horrible happens. And I mean, if we're honest with ourselves, that's not like how it actually is. And so sometimes
right.
I think it's like you reach people better when you make something relatable. And what's relatable? Relatable is your parents catching you sneaking out of the house or catching you doing something wrong, because you're young and you want to have fun, you want to be around your friends, and they're compassionate about it. And so it's kind of cool to see a movie where that happens. Like you said, that store owners like whatever. I think that also speaks to the 70s. I think now, if you did that, the consequences for the store owner would be worse. We do
Yeah.
live with TABC
Well, you
now,
got
and
to
we are in the
remember
Bible Belt,
too.
so there's stricter
You have
laws
to
about
remember
alcohol.
too that the legal drinking age in Texas at that time was 18. So it was probably really hard for people like the convenience store man to definitely be able to tell if the kid's of age or not. Uh, on a personal note, again, my birthday is in September. It's right after the school year starts, right in mid September. And September 1st, I'm not sure if it's still the way it is, but was the cutoff for which year you would start school. And so I started school in the first grade when I was just a week away from being 7 years old. I was always the oldest kid in my class, uh, which came in very handy my senior year because I was among the first, if not the first seniors to turn 18 and was able to legally buy beer. And which made me very popular on Friday nights after football games.
I can imagine. Yeah, that's an interesting fact about the age too, because yeah, that makes even more sense why he would be so relaxed. Like, well, you're basically 18. Like, maybe you're not exactly 18, but you're pretty close. I remember like when I waited tables and I worked at a I think I worked at a Boston's at the time, and I remember TABC coming in and scaring us constantly, and like, coming in undercover. Like one time they watched us serve somebody that was like in their 50s, and they were still like, "You didn't card him." Like, it was like it's gotten so extreme. Maybe it's a little bit better in the past few years, but it's like I feel like that has changed too, not just the age, but like all of that has become like a little bit stricter. So it's kind of charming to see that in a movie, because you're like,
Yeah,
"Oh,
and
people didn't used to be so extreme, like, hey, I'm all for safety, definitely don't drink and drive,
oh, for
21, that's
sure.
fine." But it's like, I don't know, sometimes it's like it gets a little too extreme. And if you're honest, when you're young, you know, things happen. Like you said, you were
Right.
popular with your
And
school.
and that's another direction that Linklater could have gone with this movie. He could have had some drunk kids being in a terrible automobile accident and turning it because those things happened as well. Uh,
Sure.
and but he chose not to. It's just a slice of life this particular time. I always tell people we did everything that was in that movie. We just didn't do it all in one night. So,
Yeah, that would be a lot of experiences in one night. So, I think that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, and I agree with you, like, he could have gone a more serious route, but I think, okay, if we're honest, like, yes, bad things can happen, but it's not like your entire high school years was a chain of bad events, I hope. And so this
right,
is, like, a little bit more realistic, it's a little more fun, and it's relatively harmless, you don't really see any scenes in the movie where anyone's behaving dangerously or something. Like, for the most part,
right,
the quote unquote crimes that happen are very minor, like boosting that alcohol and things like that.
right. And I guess we got to go ahead and address the marijuana, which
Oh
is,
no. I'm just
oh
kidding.
no, uh, it is predominant in the film. It was predominant in a lot of our lives back then. I must say that I didn't fool around with it till after high school, till I got into college, and I never fooled around with it very much. But it was very predominant, and along with that, the idea of going someplace to wait in line to buy concert tickets. You got to remember this is 1976. There is no internet. You went to a Ticketmaster store or at the most convenient. I remember when the Sears stores at the mall, back to your mall, uh, started selling Ticketmaster tickets at their service center where you would go to pay your credit card bill back then. And yeah, if Led Zeppelin or Clapton or somebody was coming uh, through, you'd get up early in the morning and go. We went to the Sears at the mall and wait in line to buy our concert tickets. I saw Led Zeppelin in 1977 in Fort Worth. I think the ticket was less than $20.
Man, so I hadn't thought about that. So I hadn't thought about that, but you're right. Not only would you have to stand in line to get concert tickets, but yeah, I remember like when I first got a bank account, I was at the bank all the time. Like so many
Mm-hmm.
things that we take for granted now. I think that's why we're getting so much more exercise because we were going to the bank, we were going to buy the tickets, we were going places, and now we do it all right from our computer or our phone. Um, so really
Especially
good
now.
point there. Yeah, yeah, especially now. Like,
Oh,
now more so
Amazon is
than ever.
my friend.
Yeah, well, that's really cool. $20. Wow. I wonder how much something like that would be now. I know like the last really big concert I went to, it was I think I saw Paul McCartney at Arlington Globe Life Theater or Globe Life, what's it called?
Globe Life Field.
Globe Life Field. Yeah, and those were in the hundreds.
Yeah. Well, I had tickets to see Ringo uh, up at WinStar. It was supposed to be next month, I think. Show got canceled, but and even that was like $60 a ticket, which again Ringo's kind of not. He didn't pull down the same uh, uh, dollars as Paul does, or the Eagles. I forget about seeing the Eagles. They want all your money when they play. But back then, I think we saw the Who. I think it cost about $12.50. Uh, concerts I saw back then. Never saw Aerosmith. That's the big thing in the movie is in the background that they're waiting. In fact, the very first song you hear is "Sweet Emotion" by Aerosmith, and that's where some of the kids are going at the very end of the movie, driving on into the city so that they can buy Aerosmith tickets. Never saw Aerosmith, but saw Zeppelin, saw the Who, saw Electric Light Orchestra. Um, yeah, I'm so old. I got to see all the good bands.
There you go.
Yeah, let's talk about the music for just a minute. I don't know if it struck the same chord with you as it did with me, but I already kind of mentioned you could program a 92.5 classic rock station with just a soundtrack from this and a couple of other movies. But the placement of it between this and Forrest Gump, as far as using popular music of the time, is masterful the way a Linklater or his music, we call it music coordinator or whatever, picked the right music for the scenes to uh, not necessarily comment on what's going on, but to accentuate what's going on. When we see Matthew McConaughey's character walk into the pool hall, the Emporium, with Pink and uh, uh, Mitch walking behind him, and that's typical hero out front thing, and he's strutting, and we have Bob Dylan's song "Hurricane" playing in the background, and which Hurricane has nothing to do with these kids. Hurricane's a protest song about a black man who was falsely convicted of a crime. But just that rhythm and that feel of that song, and with the way he strutted in there, was just so perfect for that moment. Uh, when the beer runs out at the keg party at the park, we get Tuesday's Gone with the Wind. As slower song, the night is winding down. I don't think that there's any actual incidental composed for this movie music in it. I believe it's all uh, popular tunes from the middle 70s, early to middle 70s.
Hmm.
Free Ride, two or maybe three times in the film.
I think that maybe even though the characters and the plot doesn't have anything strong to say politically or socially, I think that the soundtrack is intentional and the attitudes of the teen culture at that time is intentionally linked to the 70s and how people felt and what they were thinking and feeling at that time. So it's like the soundtrack may not have a lot to do with that specific scene, but it sort of tells a story about where people's heads were at in the 70s. Do you agree?
Yeah, oh, for sure,
Yeah.
definitely. And again, even though it's set in Texas, you don't hear any country and western on this soundtrack. I'm looking here on the IMDb. There is no composer. There is music editor and music supervisor. So yeah, there is no composed music for the show. It's all popular music. I read somewhere that during the final fade out, as they're driving off to go buy the concert tickets, and we hear "Free Ride" again, uh, that they actually wanted to use Led Zeppelin's "Rock and Roll" for that, but uh, let's see, as I read it, Jimmy Page was cool with it, but Robert Plant wasn't, so they weren't able to get the rights to that. So that's why we hear "Free Ride" more than one time on this soundtrack. There's so many. The crew you mentioned riding around in cars. There's a scene very much like American Graffiti where everybody's just riding around in their cars, and we hear War's "Lowrider," which uh, my students occasionally I would play music in my classroom when they were doing work, and whenever uh, "Lowrider" would pop up, they would go, "That's the George Lopez theme song."
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, I'm like it's been around a lot longer than that.
That is funny.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's funny how people have these cultural, touch points that now they think of it as his song. That's really funny. I've never heard that before. Yeah, I think, having every single song be, like you said, no composer, that's gotta be such a challenge, especially, the budget of this movie went largely to that. But that's also kind of gotta be kind of scary because it's like, man, we really have to edit this thing to where it fits with all these songs and there's a limited amount of songs we can use. So because they're not like making up their own music for it. So that's kind of a cool fact.
yeah, and we knowing a little bit about how movies are put together. Was Hurricane actually playing on the set when McConaughey walks into that building like that, or was that did they match that music to that scene later on. You know, I would like to be able to ask Linklater about uh, those kind of choices. Were they made early on, or were they made as a result of what was seen on the film? That, oh, this will fit there.
Well, I know that he sent, like, the cast, CDs, and material for them to kind of research their characters and stuff like that, so I think on at least at that point, they got, probably a lot of the music and stuff from him,
Okay,
if not
I did
played
not know
while
that.
the scene was shot. Yeah, I was watching a little behind the scenes before we started recording.
Yeah, my I've got the DVD that only has it has a few deleted scenes, but it's not that there's a Criterion one that I understand has a uh, treasure trove of information on it that I don't have and have not seen. Maybe I'll get a hold of it someday. I've got the I guess the standard issue CD is main special feature that it has is a few deleted scenes, and one of the very first deleted scene you see on that is I'm glad they deleted it. It's three of the characters are in a truck. They're on their way over to the junior high to harass the incoming freshmen, and they see a couple of Asian young ladies crossing the street, and one of them is more of a rednecky character, says some very disparaging things about them. But that was something that was going on at the time as well. Was that Vietnamese refugees were starting to uh, come here and become part of our culture, and uh, some were not as welcoming as others, and that's touched on. But that scene got cut, and I think rightly. It's just an ugly scene, in my opinion. Really did not fit with the overall good feelings of this film.
Yeah, it feels like he made an intentional decision not to he was telling a different story. If he was telling the story of politically what's happening in the 70s, then he would have to touch on that.
Right.
But since he's really just telling a smaller story about these kids and their experience in high school and how they view it from their vantage point, the most political it gets is that one guy talking about like um there's a couple scenes where they just kind of talk about like the man a little bit, but it's
Yeah.
not very in depth. And I think, if he was telling a serious movie, if it was a serious film dealing with some heavy topics, would definitely welcome that. But it would feel a little out of place. I think, like you said, it would just feel like an angry scene that you're like, well, that's awful. Like, am I supposed to still like these characters? Like,
Right.
So it's like probably better to not include that and, save that for a story that requires that. I agree with you there. I did notice that when I was watching or when I was looking for behind the scenes stuff like on YouTube, that there's a lot of deleted scenes. So that must be, you talked about the Criterion Collection. There must be a lot of fans that like getting to see all the extra footage because I just noticed it came up so much.
Yeah. Well, there's just a few deleted scenes on the DVD that I have, but I understand there is another edition out there that's got a lot more stuff on it. So that's probably the things that you're finding on YouTube.
Yeah, oh man, I had another quick point about oh, another thing I wanted to touch on really quick was just that the bad guys in this movie, you kind of talked about it earlier, Ben Affleck, Parker Posey. What's unique about those characters, and Linklater said this himself, that even though they're awful, like they're bullies, they're not like they're likable bad guys. There's a little bit of charm, a little bit of enthusiasm to where it's not like too dark. You're not like, okay, this guy is like evil. He's more just like a jerk,
Yeah.
There's something human and redeeming about them. Without them being 100% terrible. I think it just kind of suits the tone of the movie so that you're not like
Yeah,
left
and you
feeling
got to
angry at
remember
them.
that Affleck's character O'Banion has just found out that he flunked and will not be graduating, and so he has a reason to be angry. Um, and so that's in there. As far as Parker Posey's character, she's just a little witch. Uh,
I saw an interview and she was like, "I'm just bad and I like it and I enjoy it." Like that when she was talking about her character. And there was just something kind of fun and funny about that because she's
yeah,
not too bad. She's just mean. But yeah, like I didn't think about that about him not graduating. That does make sense. He at least has some reason to be angry. I also heard that at the end when he or at that scene where he gets all that paint dumped on him, that
right.
he the words he chose in that scene in that moment, uh the not the director but I think the producer was like, you can't say that, man, you can't, that's worse than the F word. And he's like, how is it worse? And he's like, it just is, you just can't say that. And they had to like really stick up for it and let him like curse in that one scene. And it's like,
Now that's
because if you censor him, it's like, come on, he's in high school, like, like this is how kids talk.
right. Yeah, and speaking of that, there's a stat on the IMDb page. I'm not going to look it up right now, but the F word, they've got a count of how many times it was used in the film. I think the only movie I know about where it was perhaps used more was The Commitments, but that's just how people in Ireland talk. Uh, and the word man was there's astronomical number of times the word man was used.
Oh yeah, I actually have the word man is said 203 times in the movie. So there you go. I also liked that one character that keeps saying the, I guess like the stoner kid. He keeps saying what's that phrase he keeps repeating over and over?
Uh,
He's like, "You know what I
I know
mean?" Or
you know as Slater, as Roy Cochran as Slater. There's the one point he gets made fun of because he tells the girls, "Check you later, man. Check you later." Uh, but oh, he always wants to ride shotgun. Is that it?
yeah, he always wants to ride shotgun, and then there's that scene where he's talking about the dollar bills and how they're green,
Oh yeah.
and he says, gosh, I'm gonna find this. I'm gonna edit this so that it's not just me looking for this forever. But let me see if I can find it. It's kind of like he's saying something to the effect of like, "You're following me, you know what I'm saying?"
Uh,
But he doesn't say, "You know what I'm saying." He says something like that. Let me
did you
see.
ever look at a dollar bill, man? There's some spooky stuff going on there, and it's green too.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah, I'm looking for that monologue.
You know, that
It's
used
kind
to
of
be a
goofy.
thing too. That you'd look at a dollar bill and there's all this symbolism on there, and
Yeah,
that's what he's getting
Illuminati.
to. You know, the eye above the pyramid and all this Masonic stuff. Well, he gets into that, but it used to be all of these conspiracy theories of that some Illuminata was actually running our country and
Well,
all that.
and I think some of that was probably influenced by the marijuana.
Yeah.
Um like you start having a lot of philosophical thoughts. I'm going to find this. It's going to happen.
Why are you looking for that?
Yeah, go for it.
The other day, I mentioned this to you. Uh, there's a list of filming locations, and I went to Google Maps and Google Earth, and a lot of the places are still there. Tip Top Burgers or Top Hat Burgers, whatever that was called, is still there. Still looks the same. The houses, they had the addresses for the houses. They still look, some very nice houses that the kids lived in, like a Pickford's house. Yeah, the Pickford's mom and dad was the one adult characters that weren't quite as cool as some of the other adult characters. Uh, uh, the football field is still there, but it has artificial turf now. The high school was really a middle school, and the middle school was really an elementary school, and they're still there. But and some of the places are gone now.
That's what I'm talking about. That's what he's saying. All right, so rewinding. Yeah, yeah. So rewinding real quick to what I was talking about with Slater. Uh, Behind the scenes, Richard Linklater said that he wanted to work in. That's what I'm talking about, man. Because he said that that phrase is used so often. That's what I'm talking about. and
Okay.
said so often in the 70s for whatever reason, like just punctuating your point. And he was going to bring this to the actor, and when he met the actor, immediately he said, "Hey, I think my character would say, 'That's what I'm talking about, man. That's what I'm talking about. That's what I'm talking about, man.'" And he went, "Oh my gosh, we're like on the same page. Exactly. Yes, you're the right choice." And I just thought that was funny because it just the different lingo that you use in different eras, phrases that kind of get overused, and that's just kind of interesting. I just like that little point. I took a long time to through the magic of editing, you won't notice, but I spent a long time looking for that.
Right.
But were there any other scenes that we haven't touched on yet that you wanted to talk about?
That's what I'm
You know what I'm
talking
talking about?
about.
Yep.
Uh, well, again, I really like the theme of a couple of the older kids taking the younger kids under their wing. I like the Don's character, Sasha Jensen, who was a stunt guy before he did this movie, and he didn't do a whole lot of other acting roles. But near the end, they're at the football field, and he gives this nice speech. The camera's on Jason London as Pink, and a nice, probably a steady cam shot as the camera kind of moves around him. And but in the background, we hear Don saying, uh, this little monologue about how he wanted it. Let's see. Yeah, here it is right here. Well, all I'm saying is that I want to look back and say that I did the best I could while I was stuck in this place. Had as much fun as I could while I was stuck in this place. Played as hard as I could while I was stuck in this place, et cetera, et cetera. Uh, and I kind of like that because it's almost like he realizes that in another year, they're incoming seniors. Another year, that's going to be gone. And how many people have we known that their senior year in high school, sadly enough, may be the best time of their entire lives? Uh,
Yeah, there's definitely like an innocence and nostalgia to that time in your life. I mean, it's that weird in between, right? Where you're not quite an adult yet. You're sort of a free agent, a little bit freer from your parents than you were as a kid. And even if it's a rough time, there's some fun stuff about it that you're never going to relive again. And you don't really realize that while it's happening. So to have that self awareness of like, hey, this is like, the maybe the last time I'm gonna see all these people, the last time I'm gonna do all this stuff, and there's things about that I need to really enjoy even though I'm stuck here, even though there's things limiting me. Um, I just wanna do the best I can and have the most fun that I can during this time. Like, I mean, I certainly didn't have that level of self-awareness in high school, so I like that too.
yeah. And one of the funniest scenes was when some of the guys or the young men are riding around and for a prank they're gathering up trash cans and throwing them against the mailboxes, and there's a bowling ball in the car, and the upperclassmen uh, dare the freshmen to chunk the bowling ball out of the car. And I think their intention was to hit another mailbox, and he misses and hits something else, and it is just like dead silence for 15, 20 seconds, and then they just all hysterically start laughing. Uh, it's you got to see it to just get that moment, but it's a cool moment, cool editing job, and that just the exact right amount of seconds pass before the tension is broken with the laughter, and uh, just a cool piece of filmmaking there when something totally unexpected happens uh, from what has been established is about to happen.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, there's another kinda scene like that too where, um, those 2 younger kids are walking around and they're drinking, and then one of them just ruins everything by breaking the beer bottle, and then they have to run. I thought that part was kind of funny too.
Oh, yeah, yeah. There's some three of the freshmen. Uh, Two of them had escaped the hazing. One of them got hazed, but again, they're showing how cool the seniors were about it. At the same time, they after they busted the kid's butt, they gave them a beer, and so these three kids are sharing that beer, and then uh, one of them throws the bottle in the air, and it comes crashing down onto the pavement, and they have to scatter once again.
Yep, just some good old harmless fun. Well, I guess, are you ready for the last two couple of questions then?
Okay.
Okay. So, I always ask my guests these last two questions. I know we've talked about it this whole time when we're chatting about the movie, about why we love it, but if you had to summarize it, why do you think you've seen this movie so many times?
Um, it's a cool movie. It's because of the soundtrack, and again because I've seen it so many times. I can put it on and be doing something else, and it be just a nice, comfortable thing to have playing in the background. Or I can sit down and watch it and just enjoy it for its nostalgia again because it takes me back to my high school days. Or the third aspect of it is that it is indeed so well made. I can notice little things like how the bowling ball scene was edited to get the effect that it does, or how the music matches up with what's going on in there. So you can watch this film on any level that you want to. It can be classic rock station playing in the background, or it can be a time capsule of a time in my life anyway. Or but it's also a very nice piece of filmmaking. It if you want to get uh, real critical about it. It follows Shakespeare's unity of time thing, and that the whole thing is set within just a few hours during late one day and that night going into the next morning. Uh, Unlike some of the other teen films uh, that were made during this time, like Fast Time, which covers a whole year in the kid's life. It's a time capsule, and it's very comfortable. I like to watch it and say, okay, this is like my friend. One character is like my friend Joe Bob, or this girl's like my friend Sally Sue, or whomever, and just enjoy that nostalgia. Uh, so yeah, it works on several levels. You can watch it as a fine piece of filmmaking, or it can be a comfort blanket for you.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah, I like that. I think that this is kind of one of those movies, kind of like we talked about Empire Records recently. We've talked about High Fidelity and the movie Once. There's a lot of movies that really the soundtrack is a huge part of them.
Mm-hmm.
And in some ways, for you personally, it's a soundtrack of your life, your life in that time,
Oh, for
and
sure.
it does such a good job of portraying that. And I think for me personally, um, I really appreciate that it's like American Graffiti. And I've heard people say before, like they'll see American Graffiti and then they're kind of disappointed. Like they're like, well, nothing happened. And, like I was kind of bored. And I was like, yeah, I think you either really like that kind of movie or you don't.
Right.
Um, I loved it the first time I saw it, and I've seen it several times since. I think I own it. Um, but yeah, I really enjoy revisiting it. So I don't think I made that connection that this was so similar to that until you told me. And then when I was watching it, I was like, yeah, I can see myself revisiting this because I wish there was more movies like this where it just truly feels like you got inserted into somebody's good night, and there's something really fun about that, and something so different from other teen movies about it. So yeah, all those things, and all the things you said too about it's a great piece of filmmaking. And so many stars were made through this movie and so many careers, and it's just fun seeing all those people at their start So that too.
Right.
Um, I guess that leads into my next question. How would you pitch this movie to someone that hasn't seen it before?
Well, the other day when I was rolling it, my granddaughter, 12, was 12 years old, was here. I said, "Hey, you want to see what it was like when Papa was in high school?" uh, yeah, that's how pretty much how I've pitched it. Hey, this movie got it right. If you want to see what it was like, or what my life was like in the middle 70s, watch this movie, watch the first couple of years of that 70s show, and you've got a pretty good idea of what life was like back then. Uh, and it's just fun. Again, there's no high moral ground here. You don't have, like in Fast Times, you don't have somebody going off to make a very hard moral decision. I won't get into what that is about a choice that she's made. You don't have any of that in this, and and it's only an hour and 40 minutes long, so it's not like it's a major investment in time. Uh, there's not a whole lot to get into deep thought about. There is a couple little philosophical discussions in it. You know, some of the more brainy kids start talking about, where do they fit in? That the 60s were great, but the 70s obviously sucked. So maybe the 80s will be wonderful. Uh, uh, but again, it's it's just a time capsule. It's just what it was really like. It was really Linklater based these characters. In fact, he got sued. Did you know this?
No.
He got sued by some of his former classmates, claiming that he used their likenesses and in some cases their thinly disguised names to create some of these characters, and they didn't get any compensation anyway. As I understand it, the case got thrown out because it was past the statute of limitations. Uh, but he was the typical 70s teenager, as was I, and as was all my classmates. Oh, this is so sad. This would have been our 45th class reunion, and because of what's going on now, we're not able to have it this year. And but So this is kind of like a class reunion for me in a way to be able to watch this movie.
Oh.
Glad you gave me an excuse to dig it out of my DVD pile.
Aw. Oh, that's good. I'm glad that you got to relive some of it. I know all of us are having to put all these events on hold that we're really looking forward to this year. It's really tough. Hopefully you guys can have a makeup next year. I love your pitch though. I think yeah, if you're into this kind of slice of life and time capsule, I love that. Of the 70s, I don't think we get to see a whole lot. Like I said, I feel like we see a lot of like, you know, Saturday Night Fever kind of stuff. So it's kind of
Right.
nice to see something like this. I think the closest thing, I think David Wang in the group was talking about like Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, which Tarantino was very influenced by this movie. And so you can see some of that in there, but you just don't see it portrayed very often. And I think if you like some of those other movies like that, you might like this as well. So a great thing to revisit.
Yeah, I've heard that
Well,
Tarantino was influenced by this movie too. So, uh,
yeah.
but again, there's no blood guts gore. There's no drunken car accidents. It's just kids being kids in 1976, and that's all it is. And that's in 1975, 76 when that was me. That's all we wanted was just to be kids, to have a good time. Now had the freedom to buy our own beer and party, and we weren't really thinking, which came also soon after, about marrying, settling down, raising kids, all that. That's in the future, and I guess that's it for me. This was in a time when all that dad responsibility. When Don't get me wrong, I love being a father and I love being a grandfather, but this was before all that, when I could just be a kid and have fun and think about deeper meanings or not, you know. And it was we were just being, as I said earlier.
Yeah. I think some of the best movies let us, revisit nostalgic times like that, like you said. I mean, it fills you with a lot of good feelings, and it's fun to reminisce about before all the responsibilities we have today, even if we enjoy them. But yeah, thank you so much for coming back, John. I really appreciate having you. I know you love a ton of movies, so you're definitely going to have to come back, and we're going to have to do this again.
Oh, I would love to, but I know you've got a lot of other friends who also have movies they love, so I'll just wait my turn. And but yeah, next time let's make it a baseball movie.
I'm down with that. That's awesome. All right.
Yes.
Well, thanks so much.
Oh, you're so welcome. Thank you for having me.